Hello again and welcome to another tutorial session.
So now we're moving into the more complex track formations of tandems and slips, and we'll start by having a look at tandems in this video.
Tandem points, there are various classifications of them. One way of classifying them is to call them double-sided or one-sided. And if this is the main route through the tandem, then obviously if it's double-sided, one comes off on one side and the other comes off on the other. If they're single-sided, they both come off on the same side. Another way of looking at them is whether they're a type 1 or a type 2. And a type 1 would be where both of the branch tracks come off the main track. And a type 2 would be where the second branch comes off the first branch. Now, if you just draw those out diagrammatically, I can never see the difference between them. There will be differences, partly because Templot has to call a track a branch or a main, because it will calculate its geometry accordingly. But the only practical difference I can see is exactly which rail has the set in it or a joggle and which has the smooth curve for the faster running. Anyway, that's my take on it. So for the purposes of this, we'll be ignoring the type 1s and the type 2s, but we'll have a look at putting them both on one side or on opposite sides. And the easiest one to start with is a double-sided one, and we'll make this one a straight one. So I'm just going to bring that a bit out of the way. So we'll make this template a turnout. And to make a tandem, a double-sided one, you do need to start with a reasonably gentle point. Martin advises nothing less than a B7.5. So I'm going to make this a B8. And to do that, we come into real V crossing options. You see it defaults to a regular, which is what it needs for this as well. V crossing angle. And we'll change the 6 to an 8. Okay, I'm just going to roam it along a little bit just so it's in the middle a bit more. So that's our starting point. And now it could hardly be easier actually, because if you go into tools and come down to make three-way tandem turnout and across to, please tick this first, is a help sheet. And if you haven't done it before, or it's a while before you go back and do it again, very succinct, very helpful. Suggest you read that. Make double-sided tandem, and it will make the tandem in 2 stages. So we begin. It will tell you that the new second turnout is going to be a regular V crossing, although you could make it a curviform if you wanted to. You can remember the difference between those. A regular crossing is straight through the crossing on the branch. A curviform crossing, the curve of the closure rails continues through the crossing and into the branch track. So if you're going to have a crossover, you would have a straight there. Right, so that's fine. Click go, and there it is. And it puts the second point in, but it doesn't quite finish the job. And it doesn't quite finish it because there are things you need to check to make sure there aren't any conflicts, for one, between where wing rails and check rails will go and wheel flanges passing by nearby. So there and there, for instance, is quite close. And the other thing is that very often you're designing a point that you know where it's going. You've already put the siding position is defined, and that's in over here. And you want to see whether this is actually going to reasonably lead into that or into the curve of the main track, for instance. And so what it does by going halfway along here is it would allow you to adjust the second turnout here. So if you hit that, then all of the functions of the second turnout, this one here, like curve, changing the V angle, changing the switch, making it curviform, regular, or whatever, you can do all of those manipulations on this second turnout. And it's up to you to check that everything is going to fit and not conflict. What you can't do once you've started this tandem sequence is to change the first turnout. That stays a regular B8 in this case.
Laurie, can I just ask here?
Sure.
When you're doing one of these tandems, can you have, say, the first one is a regular crossing, and then the second one is a curvy form?
I believe so. The other way around, you mean?
Well, either. Can they be different? So one's a regular and one's a curvy form.
We can certainly make the second one a curviform here. If we come to real crossing options, curviform. So that's now curviform. And if we put a branch track on that, Templot will continue that curve into the branch.
Yeah.
Whereas with it being regular and straight there, it would be a straight branch that would come out.
Yeah.
I think when it's done, you can also highlight this template and make that a curviform if you wanted to. We'll try that at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, so the places to look, and you usually need to expand it here. We're going to have wing rails coming out here, and we need to be clear of the flangeway there. And we need to be sure that there's enough gap there for the flange between that and the check rail. Now that's good, and just from experience, there's not going to be a pile left spare there, but there's going to be space to put the wing rail in there. And it's not that uncommon to have a shortened wing rail there, as long as there's enough of it to carry the wheel over the gap and onto the crossing. So now we come back into tools again to the tandem. And if we go to where we were, make double-sided tandem, you see that we don't have the begin option left because that's now faded, but we can now continue. And there we go. And it tells you what it's calculated. So I'm just going to reduce that. No, I can't reduce it. So it asks you, is this what you want? And it tells you that the V crossing angles are roughly 1 in 5, 1 in 8, the original 1 in 6.28. It tells you what the minimum radii are, which is another thing to watch. And our minimum radius here is effectively 30 inches, which is fine. So yes, we like that. We can see here that we probably want to bring that check rail back a little bit just to be sure. But otherwise, I don't think there are any conflicts there. So yes, continue. Right, and that's just telling you that there are other things we need to fettle. I don't want name labels here, so just bear with me. So there's the tandem. It's done the crossings all very nicely. What we have to do now is just adjust the check rails. For instance, that really needs to be a single check rail without a flare in the middle. That needs to be shorter. That's okay. I think in the real thing, that wing rail would probably continue into that check rail as well. And there's a very nice function that helps us do that very, very simply. This is imbuing prototype details and characteristics into the model. So we would find it under the real heading. And if we come down, you'll see one that says adjust check rails. Right. It won't adjust check rails because it's the branch track, which is the control, and the control doesn't have any check rails. So it says, don't like that. So we'll save that control. And now we'll highlight something here and see if any of that needs adjusting. And that end needs adjusting. So we'll, in my wand, I'll delete that to the control. It asks you if I want to keep the tandem tag on the name of this template. And yes, I do, because it helps to identify it in the storage box if I'm looking along it. If I come into the storage box, okay, you'll see that it's tagging them all as part of the tandem rather than just ordinary plain track. So now we'll have another go at doing the check rails, and you can see that each end of each check and wing rail in this template is identified by a number, and we have a box of things we can do with each one of those when we highlight it. So this is the one that we want to play with, this end of this check rail. So we highlight that, and now it tells us what we can do. You can basically do whatever you want with it. You can alter the rail length, you can alter the flare length, you can make it machined rather than flared, you can straighten it, you can alter the gap at the end so you flare it more. But what we want to do is to lose that flare. So here we are, change flare type, bent, machined, none. And it goes straight. And that's the only thing we need to do with that one. So we can now store that template because it's been deleted, and we've now saved that one. And one useful thing about the check rails, because you've often got a lot of templates that you want to manipulate check rails with one after the other, you don't lose this box, which is one of the frustrating things that template does sometimes with other functions. So now we'll bring up this, and you can see here that it's actually reduced the template of a point or a diamond right down to just the pure crossing. And that's the sort of thing you can do manually as well if you're doing a very irregular formation. So we'll delete that to the control, retain the prefix tag, and we want this one straight as well to marry the other one. So change flare type, none, and that straightens that. I can't avoid the cross lines that define the end of each one of those. There's no way of actually getting rid of that. Now this one, I think, is a bit too tight. So what we need to do there is shorten it, all right? And it's much easier, I find, to do all these adjustments of check rails and wing rails by mouse action, and then you can titrate it against what you're after. So here we've got by mouse action, and we can have rail length, and we can bring that back. And as long as the bit before the flare is opposite the crossing, we're all right. We've actually got much more freedom there in the model than you'd have in a prototype. We can also slightly reduce the flare length. No, it's down to a minimum there. We've got it as low as we can get. What I'll do is I'll just demonstrate the effect of that. Okay, so that's roughly where it was. You can see the effect of increasing and reducing the flare length. Can you see it keeps the offset of the end of the flare the same, and it just increases the angle of the flare from the main part of the wing rail. But the main thing we want to do is to actually shorten the rail. And if we really wanted to be careful about it, we could actually make it a machined end rather than a bent end. And there's plenty of room there. Look, if you compare the space you've got there with the flangeway, say there, you see you've got plenty spare there. So now we can save that one. And the other thing we might want to do is this one. And you see that template is just that one bit of ring rail. So we'll delete that to the control. That's highlighted because it's the only option. And we want to lose the flare again. And we want to lengthen this to join up with the other one. Save that. And this one, finally, delete to the control, keep the tag, lose the flare. Sorry, I haven't highlighted it. Can you see anything else that needs done there? I think that's it, isn't it?
Apart from moving timbers about a little bit, because you've got two almost overlapping each other.
That's right.
Um,
Do you want to shove a few timbers here just to see some of the options in there? Because this is really sort of part of making these complex formations.
you can for me, yeah.
Yep. Okay. It's called shoving timbers. And again, because you're putting prototype details in, it's under the real menu.
Don't forget to store your template.
Have I not done that?
Oh, you might have done actually.
I think I did. If I store it again, I'll have two of them, but better that than lose it. Thank you, Richard. Okay, so real, timbering, and you've got loads of options here. We did go over the main features of this last time, so I won't go on in detail, but basically you can make it any form of timbering, sizes of timbering you want. But what we're after is shove timbers, which is down at the bottom here. And as soon as you bring that up, you see each timber is numbered. Now, if we deal with the big timbers here, then we can see that there are 3 here we don't need because they're duplicating the others. This one needs to stay where it is because that supports the crossing nose. I don't have a great knowledge of timbers, but there are some places where if you're being prototypical, you should always have a supporting timber. Chairs are standardized and you need to put the timbers in the right places so the chairs fit the rail formation. One of the places is under the crossing nose. You would always have a timber there. You would always have a timber either side of the stretcher bar. Here's the tie bar in white. We call it a tie bar, prototypically the stretcher bar. So you'd always have one either side there. Templot, of course, builds the point up in its prototypical components of switch, closure rails, and crossing. So it shows the joins between those. And here's the join between the switch rails for the second turnout. In fact, these timbers are all closer together than normal. But if the switch is long enough for these to start to spread out to the standard sort of 2'6" spacing, then either side of a rail join, they would be down to 2 foot. So they'd be closer there. And also where the closure rails meet the crossing, it's not actually shown here, but it would be about here, then there would be timbers closer there too. So we want to lose some here, and as soon as you highlight it, it goes red. That's like the control timber, if you like. And we've got lots of options here, but the one we want is omit timber. And away she goes. And we want to get rid of that one too. And we want to get rid of that one as well. Now, these timbers, I think, are going to be all right. We haven't got rails coming across here. But, well, if we save that template, and we make a new template, and we shift and join that, we can see where that's going to go. We could perhaps curve that a little bit if it's going off to a siding somewhere. And again, we've got the radius down at the bottom here. So we're down to about a 4 foot radius there. Make it about a 3'6" one there. So we'll save that. Now we've got a lot of timbers overlapping there, but what's useful about that is it shows us roughly how long these crossing timbers should be. So if we come back to what I'm trying to do is highlight the template that's got these timbers on. And if you dot around over it, you can find it. Sometimes you've got too many templates overlaying on the one you're trying to identify, and you have to go back into the storage box, find it in the list, and then highlight it from there. So we'll delete this to the control, retain the label. And now we can highlight this one. And what we want to do with this one is to shorten it back down to about here. And I'm going to do it by the mouse, this one. And you can see we've got all sorts of things we can do with this. So I'll just show you what they are. You might be familiar with them, in which case my apologies. But you can move it along. You can twist it. You can crab it. If you crab it, it stays in the same orientation. If you do the along, it will follow the line of the point. So if the point is curved, the timber will gradually slope to go with the curve. You can throw it, which means push it one way or the other, like that. You can alter its length, and you can alter its width. Crossing timbers are usually 1 foot wide, and you can see these are thicker than the ordinary plain track timbers there. So on this one, what we want to do is to shorten it. And it's doing the other way, look. It will always shorten or lengthen on the end away from the label. That's like its peg at that end. So we've got two operations to do here. We have to judge how far back we're going to take it, roughly to there. And then we want to throw it to bring it back into alignment. There you are, it's not far off. So that's one way you can do it with the mouse.
Laurie, can I just ask again here?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
You deleted 3 timbers earlier, X1Z, X2Y, X3X.
Yeah.
But they're still there. Why? Is there any reason why they haven't disappeared in total?
I think because there are 2 templates which have still retained their sleepers as part of the Tandem program that are effectively the same templates, but have been reduced to contribute different rails.
Okay.
So we've got duplicates there. So yes, you're right. We also, while we're on this template, need to delete these 3.
Yeah.
When you're making up complex bits yourself, you may well be copying the same template many times, but using different rails of it. And each time you generate it, it will generate with the timbers. And so you need to whittle away all the timbers until you've just got one timber left that's the right length in the right position.
Oh, sorry, Laurie.
Yeah.
It's also possible that you've got 2 of that same bit, because I reminded you to store it, and it might have already been stored.
It's your fault, Richard.
it may well be. Because
that's another possibility.
Yeah,
I can see where you've shortened that X8 timber now, and you've thrown it, and there's still a timber on the background.
Yeah.
And I think you're potentially editing the duplicate.
Yes.
Yeah. What we're going to do, though, is I'm just going to leave all the duplicates there, because we'll just kill those at the end.
Yeah.
And the easiest job is actually just to remove a timber.
Just one other thing, just while we're on this bit, before you close it down.
Yeah.
On the shove timber panel that's open,
yeah,
at the bottom right corner, you've got the hide button. Then next to the left of that, you've got an arrow button. Does that move the peg position of the timber?
No, I didn't know what it did until I brought this box up.
We'll be editing that bit then.
No, I'll include it, warts and all.
All right.
What it does, look, it enables you to define which timber you want to play with by putting in the number of the timber rather than highlighting it with the mouse. So we'll prove that in a minute. And if that's wrong, then I will edit it all out. With Templot, there are usually 2 ways of making adjustments. One is by mouse action, so that you click on a function And by holding down the left button or clicking the left button and letting it release, you can titrate how much you want to change it until it looks right, and then you stop it. But there are also nearly always the facilities, often through a different section of the menu, to go in and enter the figures or dimensions or the other characteristic that you want it to take up. In other words, not by the mouse, but because you know you want this track to be 250 millimeters long rather than slide it along until it looks right. So along here, for instance, we've got the mouse action to do all those things with the timbers. But along here, we can do it stepwise. And somewhere in the settings is the facility to alter how big the steps are. So for instance, for length, very often in the prototype, timbers would be cut to 6-inch increments. And you can set that here. So if we lengthen this one, you'll see it will go down in a step or go up in a step. It's at the bottom still. And if we shorten it, it'll come back in a step. Likewise, you can push it backwards in steps and forwards in steps. And you can do the twist and the crab and the along as well. C is clockwise, AC is anti-clockwise for the twist. And you can also make them narrower or wider. Okay, so you've always got the two ways of doing it. Let's just see if that arrow does what we thought it did. X7D. So if we put in a 7 here. Yeah, there we go. So if we shorten it again by about the same amount, and now we throw it again. Okay. So you get the idea there. And I'll just save that. And if we can try and find this other template, I'm going to have to go into the box to find this one by the look of it. So we'll just come back here to see which it is. It's not that one, not that one. It is that one.
Yeah, it's that one.
It's that one. So we'll delete that to the control. Retain the tag. Shove timbers. Highlight that. Lose it. Highlight that. Lose it. There's still another one in behind there, look. Sometimes you end up with multiple templates one on top of the other. But that in essence is the shove timbers. If you're short of a timber, if you've got a hole, then you have the option of a bonus timber. And it usually puts it at the beginning of the template. And then you have to throw it all the way along to where you want it. And then you can do whatever you want with it there. So you can lose timbers, you can add timbers, you can make them any size, shape, orientation, length you like. Okay? I would suggest that whenever you're building a layout, that the timbering is the very last thing you do, because you can spend hours shoving timbers. And if you look at it when you've done it all done and you think, oh, I want that point just, I want it a 7, not an 8. And you do it again, you've got to do all the timbers again. So I would always do the timbers the very last thing. Let's now have a look at making a tandem turnout where both roads come off the same side of the main road. We'll go as far as the basic point work, but not do the check rails or shove timbers, as we've already seen how that operates. We'll start with a new template and we'll make it a turnout, and we'll make it an 8 again. It's less critical for this, I think, as to how long this one is to start with if we're putting both turnouts on the same side. Mine just went AWOL for a moment. B crossing angle. Let's just bring up the information screen and then we can see what we're dealing with. So we've now got a B8. Now, for this, when they're coming out the same side, this is the second turnout. So we need to make sure we've got enough track on the approach side here. Template calls this the approach track, to be able to fit in another turnout. So we could roam it. The other way to do it is to put the peg the other end so that we can now use the approach function and extend that. And I'm just going to store that a minute. We'll now put the peg back where it belongs. That's still the control template, don't forget. Right, so I'm going to take that away because I don't want to confound it with a background template duplicating things underneath and getting timbers and rails in the way. So back to tools, tandem, single-sided tandem, begin. Same questions here. It goes halfway again and it asks us if that's correct. It gives us the option again of adjusting the new turnout it's added, which this time is the first one. So we need to check the same things. Tight, but I think that could be brought back and made enough space there. We're clear with the check rails there. That wing rail will probably continue there, which is no problem. And we're a long way away between the tip of that wing rail and this rail here. The other thing that I didn't mention that you need to check is that the two crossings here on the middle road, this one and this one, are not opposite each other. They have to be far enough apart that the check rail can properly check both crossings, one after the other. I'm just going to show you what I mean here. So I'll say I want to adjust the first turnout. Okay. And I'm going to do this by mouse action this time. So I'm going to go into reel, adjust the V crossing angle, and that will change the geometry of that first turnout. Now you can see if you want to try and give more space between this ring rail and this running rail, you can do that by increasing the V angle. But when you do that, you do bring it further away from that running rail. But can you see how you're now bringing it very close to being opposite this other crossing here? So that would be a no-no because you could not check that. Even in a model, that would risk a derailment. So we need to come back from there. We've got the V number here is following what the mouse is doing. So we'll bring that back to a whole number if we can, because it's easier to file on a jig to get the right chamfer. But that's the only reason. So that's probably where it started. Let's make it a, see if we make it a 6.5. And that's okay because we've got one crossing nose here and one here. Let's just expand that. So there's one crossing nose there and one there. They're close, but they'll be checked all right. So now we can come back in, make three-way tandem, continue the single-sided tandem. And there she goes. And you can see that we've got the same sort of finishing off to do. I have made a boo-boo because this check rail now, which wasn't shown in the halfway house, is actually confounding the flangeway there. And if we bring it back to clear the flangeway, it won't be checking this crossing. So I pushed it too far. Can you see that?
Yeah.
I'm not going to bother to do that again because I think if I'd stuck with what Templot offered to start with, it would have been tight here, but we could have reduced the wing rail length and maybe the flare, maybe made it machined in the way we did with the first tandem we made to make it to clear the flanges coming on this running rail. I was really just doing that to show how you can alter it and something to beware of. And I've been hoisted by my own petard. Okay. And then there's all this timbers to shove and that as well. Now, the other thing about timbers is on plain track, you can roll timbers, it's called. I'm going to save that one. And I'm going to add a branch road on the middle road as well. There. Now, I'm going to save that. Can you see that we've actually got some confounding of the sleepers here and there?
Yeah.
Now, a way of avoiding this, as long as the sleeper spacing is regular and it allows you to do it, is to do what's called roll sleepers. Now, if we make this the control, we want mouse action and reel because we titrate this with the mouse. And you can see at the bottom of this, after all the turnout stuff, is roll rails and sleepers. And what this does is it just basically rolls the rails and the sleepers up and down. All right, so if we now try and get these sleepers to interdigitate with these, like so, sometimes you just have a slight overlap, and I usually accept that rather than do them individually. You can shove each of these timbers individually if you like. That's just a bridge too far for me on plain track. I get it as close as I can, and then I adjust that by eye when I'm actually making it. Okay, so we can save that. And now we've got a bigger conflict on this side. So if we make that the control, and again, we roll the sleepers here. Where are we? Hang on, sorry, reel. Again, we can get those clear of them all too. And if we wanted to come into the timbering and shove timbers, then we can just get rid of the ones that overlap here. Easy peasy. Save it. Still work to do on the timbering around there, but you can see how you can use both of those.
Laurie, I would assume if you decided that you actually wanted some longer sleepers to cover two of the tracks or whatever, you could remove some of these and just put a longer one in.
Yeah, or it's probably easier to leave the ones that are there. For instance, if you made this the control again, delete to the control, you can do whatever you want shoving timbers here. So say you wanted longer timbers coming across this way.
Yeah. Yeah, just take
choose 54, make it a crossing timber, throw it and lengthen it.
Yeah.
Would it go across all three tracks in prototypically?
I think it would up to a point, and I suspect that point would vary with company. Some companies didn't use long bulk timbers at all. I mean, the Caledonian, for instance, all had interlaced sleepers. Jim Watt's done that beautifully on his layout. I don't know enough about the prototype to know what the rules would be about how far along the long timbers would be, because I think when they're this long, they wouldn't be a single piece of wood. They'd be two shorter timbers that would be jointed, and that's expensive. That's much more expensive than having shorter timbers.
Yeah, they were. The long timbers were super expensive. I built an arrangement for a layout which was 3 turnouts together, not like a tandem like this, but kind of the running lines split into a loop, and then at the same time there was like a siding coming back each side of it, so there's kind of 2 one way and 1 the other way all joined up. And so one timber would have gone across all of that because it was still in the crossing area of the connections, if that makes sense. And it's going to vary by company. Like Laurie already said, that Jim Watt's done some great work imitating the Caledonian way of doing it, which was just use ordinary timbers everywhere. The Western favoured using longer timbers. They didn't interlace. You got some long timbers there, but basically as soon as they could use an ordinary sleeper instead of a timber, where sleepers are used under plain track and timbers are used under switch and crossing work, they would revert to timbers. And that was only a handful of sleepers after the crossing had been made. What Laurie's got here on screen, in actual fact, possibly one timber less would be used. So almost if you omit that, that we spent a whole pile of time, you could probably start your sleepers there, although I suspect they wouldn't have done. And the reason for that is that the sleeper would be under the adjacent rail.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't have been able to lift it and pack it so well. I think the short answer is it's down to company and location. It isn't very helpful.
Rich, on that basis then, the timber A55 that's highlighted, that's there now,
yeah,
would that extend across the lower track then? Because it's at the moment it's a normal length and it's under the adjacent rail.
I think if we were going to take this and build it, then we'd miss A55 out.
Yeah.
We'd leave that timber in, quite probably.
54 slightly left, but
yeah, A54 would probably exist.
You'd just skew it a bit, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact wording. There's a really good book on Great Western grouping practice that was written by David Smith, who has experience of working on the prototype. So his information is primary and secondary source stuff. And it's something in there like, so not for this, but for normal turnout, the way the crossing works out, all the timber spacings are in there and the kind of chairs that would be used for all the different bits for the specific size of crossing. And once the last timber was placed, then it tells you how far to space the sleeper on, and I can't remember whether it's the branch route or the main route in Templot sense, but it basically says place it 2'6" and then make the other sleepers work round it and carry on down the rail. So that's what prototype practice was there. Do the crossing as per the book and then put this timber in and then just work the rest out.
I mean, I think there are some basic rules, aren't there? I mean, like the positions I said, I know are true, and there may be others that are dependent on the particular chairs, for instance, exactly where you put a sleeper under a knuckle, for instance. And I think the other maxim is that you wouldn't normally have any sleepers that were further than 2'6" centre lines apart. So if you can't actually get a sleeper close enough to the next one, then you've got to rejig it somehow else, which might mean that you've actually got two sleepers next door to each other. Some of the work on Yeovil Town, there are several sleepers, I think, through the single slip, where the timbers are continuous, really, and you wouldn't have any ballast in between the timbers for several timbers length. That's on a main running line.
Some great pictures actually in that same book that I was talking about, where it shows a scissors crossing and the timber goes all the way across the whole lot.
Yeah.
It goes across the 4 foot and it goes across the 6 foot and it goes across the 4 foot at the other side for a good length of it as well, because that basically continues all the way through the diamond. So yeah, they do use some very long timbers, and as many as is appropriate for what they're trying to achieve in terms of longevity, stability and cost saving in the initial construction.
Out of curiosity as well, the next dumbish question probably is, as that is shown now, if A55 was moved slightly to the right and extended to cross, say, the bottom track, and then A54 was moved slightly to the right and was lengthened to cross the middle track and the upper track, and they were interlaced, would that normally be done?
I don't think you'd have an instance where the timber went across the bottom 2 tracks and then the next timber went across the top 2 tracks.
Yeah, that's
because you'd end up with a gap. I think you'd get one continuous timber as long as it needed to be. But what you might get is if, for example, the first one we created had a very shallow angle, the timbers might have to continue much longer there to the point where you could use separate sleepers. than the top one. If the top one was diverging quickly, you might start using sleepers on that earlier.
Okay, anything else on the tandems? You can do it on a curve as well. So the starting turnout could be a curved turnout. Depending on the sharpness of the curve, it might constrain the geometry of the point you initially start with and whether it's feasible to end up with a tandem without the conflicts we've been talking about. But Templot will certainly create this if that first track we started with was a curve, not a straight. The one thing it won't do, and it shouldn't be a problem because it's not really prototypical, is it won't calculate a tandem on a transitional curve.
You said, just going back to this one, which is a single-sided one, there are two ways of doing it, as you said. Either both lines come off the main line, or the second one comes off the first. This is obviously both coming off the main, isn't it?
Well, if this is the main, yes.
Yes.
But this could be the main.
Yeah, okay.
In which case, it's a type 2. That's what I meant by saying, from our point of view, it's largely a question of nomenclature. It's not for Templot, which has to decide which is the main, which is the datum, and then calculate up from there.
No, okay.
And it wouldn't be, I think, for the prototype either, because that would decide on which had the smooth curve, which had the set of the switch, and so on.
Yeah. So how do you get it to make a tandem then, where the tightest curve, if you like, comes off the middle one rather than the straight?
I don't have an easy answer for that, other than I would sit down with a starting point and then superimpose another point upon it, probably get rid of the timbering so you can see what's happening, and slide it about and see if you can do it without a conflict and without going to too low a radius. I don't know another way of doing it than that.
Right. No, that's good enough answer. Thank you.
Templot will have decided, because I've told it that this is the main line, this was the starting point. Both of these points will be on this straight. If it was a curve, they would both be on that curve. If you wanted to play around and say make this the main line, then you would have to start off with the curve of the radius you wanted and then add a turnout to that. The Templot would then take that as the curve. But if you wanted to try to design the geometry of one of the crossings that didn't include the definitive main line, then the only way I can think of doing it is to mint a new template of the same radius that you're after. And you could either do that by superimposing it and bending it till it overlaid it, or if you go into the information panel and you can get the value of the radius from that and tell it that you want it to be that radius as an input dimension, and then you can overlay that onto the curve and then add a point onto that, and then you've got a crossing that you can play around with by mouse action for the nature of it and its V angle.
I'll have a play.
Yes, a lot of it is just trial and error. You have to try different things and see what works and what doesn't. So we've seen the two mechanisms that Templot has in its tools menu for creating a tandem automatically. However, there are situations where these automatic functions may not produce the geometry or alignment that you might want. One is where you have a true type 2 tandem, where the second branch track comes off of the first and not from the main road. Another would be on a transitional curve, which, although not prototypical, might well be something we want to do on a model. A third is where the alignment is uncertain, because you are building up the design of a layout piece by piece by overlaying plain tracks or simple turnouts, which you then have to convert into the prototype point work when you have decided on the final alignment. In all of these situations, you would have to revert to building up a tandem piece by hand. And as an illustration of one possible way of doing this, we will try and recreate the tandem which is on the trackpad at the moment. The main route through is this constant radius curve here.
So technically it's a two-handed tandem with one branch coming off one side, one coming off the other. It may well be a geometry which the tandem function
might be able to create.
But I'm going to do it in the old-fashioned steam-powered way and build it up by hand, because it'll introduce us to the omit rails function for one, which is very useful if you're building all sorts of odd bespoke stuff. And also it just does illustrate how you can start to manipulate some of the components of the templates.
Here's the main road, which is on a radius of about 1500 millimeters.
And you start by creating two overlapping turnouts, logically enough, one with a branch to the right, one with a branch to the left. So we'll put a right-handed turnout on here. Make that right-handed. I need to roam it up a bit so that I've got some approach track to play with. And because I know the geometry will work out here, it's going to be a curviform B8. And it's got a slip switch in it, which is why there's no sleeper ring showing there. And that's because the last switch I generated was a slip switch. So we need to go into reel, switch, and we want an REA, where is it? Semi-curved B. And the V crossing we want is a curviform. We'll pretend it's going into a goods yard, so both of the exit tracks can be curved. And it wants to be an 8, which it is, so that's as much as we need to do to that. I'm going to lengthen the branch so that we can see a bit more what's happening there. Mouse action, geometry, turnout road exit.
Why has that not got sleepers on it?
It doesn't. If you extend the branch track on a turnout, it does not give you sleepers. It's just what Templot does. If you want sleepers on a branch track, then you hit branch track function,
okay.
which gives you a separate branch track fully sleepered.
Got you. Yep.
I don't know why. That's just what it does.
Just the way it is. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So now we want to copy that because we don't want to lose it to the control. But now we want the turnout coming off the opposite hand. And again, because I know it'll work, I want this to be a C10 curviform. So reel, switch, C, reel, V crossings. It's already a curviform. The V crossing angle, which is made an 8 because that's what I asked for last time, now needs to be a 10. Now the next step is to get them in the right position so that there is no conflict between the crossings and the check rails. The radii are all correct and we have enough space between the two switches. And I'm going to do it prototypically here because there should be a minimum of 2 plain chairs between the toe of one and the end of the switch of the other. So if you remember, the rail joints for the prototypical switch are shown. So on one of these switches, which we're going to push to the left, the end of the switch doesn't want to come any further up towards the toe of this one than that rail joint there. And the easiest way to do this, I could snake it, but it's one click to roam it. And it'll roam back along the main curve. Right, and you can see there that I have now superimposed the rail joins. So that's the minimum distance that you could have in a prototype between those two switches. Now I'm just going to have a check here and see where it has left the tie bar, effectively, the switch mark. It's already getting a bit cluttered with timbers. So on this one, I'm going to get rid of all the timbers so I can see what I'm doing. And it has other advantages later on, which we'll see. Okay, and you can see that these timber spacings are all okay, actually. They're not thick crossing timbers, which they should be, but we can deal with that later. So I really need to just slide the switch slightly so that comes between the timbers. And here I'm going to use a little bit of modeler's license and just slide it up towards the other one. Strictly, it should have gone back one. But with our wider flangeways, pushing it that way does give us a bit more space between the crossing and the wing rails and the running rails just there. So I've eased it by a fraction there, and in modelling terms, we won't notice that. And now I want to store that. So there is the basic geometry of our tandem. If you wanted to, you could use this to very adequately build a 2 milli point. If you drew a line the right distance beside the running rail so that you knew where to cut your sleepers there, you've actually got all the information here you need. The two crossings are joined up. You've got rails running through which obscure it a bit, but you can still see the tip of the crossing. And you could work out where the fine tip of the crossing in the forefoot is, where those two rail running sides intersect.
Laurie, assume if I do need the lowest line there to be straight, then I could just put in a piece of straight track and then line them up.
If you were doing that, to be honest, I'd start out with that being your main track. And I would ask Templot to do it using the tandem function and see where it got, because chances are it will probably do it for you. This is if you're designing to a particular layout that Templot can't produce for one reason or another.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
You know, for instance, that the wing rail is going to come up to, say, there. You know how long the check rails are. You can see what you need to see. So you might say, well, I can build from there. That's fine. But also you can, if you want, clean it up. And there are 4 areas in the rails where we could clean it up. We've got rails crossing the crossing here and here, because if you think, we've got double lines there because we've duplicated the turnout about the middle road. And then if we come back to the switches on one side of each, again, because we've doubled up from points, one left hand, one right hand, the stock rail is actually cutting across the switch blade. So I'm actually going to be pedantic and clear all of those. So I'm just going to check, because I can't remember whether I stored both. So that's one turnout, that's the other. So they're both in the storage box there. Right. So let's come to the B8, the first one, and make that the control. Under do, there's this little fellow here, omit rails and joint marks. And I bring that up and just move that over a little bit. You can see that it lists every rail and every rail joint on that template. And you can selectively omit any one of those, or all of them, or any combination. So we need to omit a main stock rail, which is one of the ones that's scything through the crossing and the switch. So main road stock rail, you see that's gone, showing the other rail belonging to the other template underneath. So we'll store that, and now we'll do the same with the other point. And again, it's a main road stock rail, if I remember correctly. And we'll store that. Now, if we just zoom in a bit, we can see that Both of the switches are now nice and neat and clean. And there. And so are the two crossings. So what remains now is to make a crossing for the V crossing in the 4-foot. And this we have to fabricate from a turnout template and position by hand and eye. I'm going to just show you how I would go about it. There would be many different ways of doing it. So we need to create a new template that we can generate into a turnout, and we'll position it overlying that crossing. So that would, the V crossing will overlie that. And then we can shorten it so that it is only that crossing. So we start off with a new bit of track. Again, I'm going to get rid of the timbering so I can see what I'm doing. Real timbering, no timbering. Now we need to curve it to the radius of either the lower or the upper track, because those are the tracks that are making the crossing. We can find out what that radius should be by highlighting that template, going into information and looking for the resultant turnout centerline radius. Resultant turnout radius centerline is 7553. Right? So now we can curve this track the right way to 7553. Well, 7555 I think is close enough, isn't it? Now we want to position it so that it overlies this lower track. And we want to avoid the switch, because if you remember, the switch has got straight bits and funny curvatures. We want it to be on the closure rails. So we want to start it round about here, just short of the crossing. So now we can shift and join, and the objective is to get the peg here overlapping the center line about here. At this stage, we want to get it about right. Okay. Now, with a fair wind, we've got the curvature pretty close. So now what we need to do is rotate it up until it's overlying it. And we're not far out, are we? I hope you're impressed.
Yes.
No, thank you. A voice in the wilderness. So now we can be a bit more accurate, which means zooming in. You see, we're just a bit out here. So let's do a shift and join so we get those smack on. And if we want to be smackest on, we can refine the shifting. We'll accept that. So we know that is right. We might still have some orientation and curvature to play with. If we come up this end, we get a better idea of how close we are, and we're not far off, look. So if we just rotate that until we're overlapping, we can come back and just see how accurate we are. And the zone we're interested in is this zone here. Now, so I can get it right, I'm actually going to extend the rail now this way. So I need to put the peg at the other end and lengthen. That just gives me enough rail to play with, so the toe of the point and everything else that I'm going to construct on this template now has room to go. Doesn't matter if it comes away from the rails here, because the only bits of the rails we actually need to superimpose accurately are where the crossing is. So now we've got that in its right position and the right curvature, we can now make that into a point. And it wants to be a left-hand point because the crossing is going off that way, which it is. You can see it's really shallow. It's in the right facing trailing. We can accept what that is, and we can now roam, because we extended the track, we can roam that back. I was hoping we could roam it back. I haven't lengthened it enough. Sorry, I'm just going to lengthen it again, some more. Need to undo that. Put that back where it came from. Now, where's the peg? Just make sure the peg's where I think it is. I need to play with the approach track. Okay, put the peg back where it should be. And we'll come in again so we can see what we're doing. Sorry about that. So it's all looking a bit of a mess, but we can work out what's what, because the background templates that we're trying to align to have blue rails, and the control template that we're trying to adjust to overlay them, the rails of that are black. So here's the fine point of the crossing. This white little cross here wants to be where that intersection is there. So we can roam it back until we get close. And now we can make an assessment as to what the V crossing angle is and what it needs to be. Okay, so here's the rail that we're trying to align to, this blue one, which follows through the crossing up here. And here's the line that we are manipulating to overlay it. So that's on the new template we're playing with. So you can see that that crossing angle of the new template is quite a bit too shallow. So now we can go into Action, Reel, Adjust V crossing angle, and bring the V crossing angle back until it's roughly parallel with the rail we're aiming for. And this is where we have an alternating cycle of adjusting the V angle, roaming it up to where the crossing should be, having a look, we're still too shallow, look. So now we need to come back to the V angle, Reel, Mouse, V crossing angle, bring it back. And now we can roam it back in place. Right. Not too far off there. Looking at the angle we're dealing with, we're below 6 and it's a C crossing, so that's going to be distorting it. So it's a C switch, sorry. So I'm actually going to adjust that to something like an A switch, which is more natural for that crossing. And we'll need to roam it back up again.
Laurie,
Yeah.
Is this how the guy recommends that you make these crossings, or is this what you've discovered?
I don't know. This is how I do it, and it's not necessarily the most efficient, but I don't think it's bad.
No.
Like I say, in the majority of cases, as long as you're not trying to do it on a transition curve, Templot would be able to design most of what you want. There'll be some restrictions because it does what the prototype says rather than what you might want to get away with in a model.
Yeah, I just wondered if it'd be easier to make another point which didn't have the middle road, and then you can take the pieces out of that you need here.
That's exactly what I'm trying to do.
Ah, sorry.
If you look now, it's a bit of a mess, but we've got the original point for the left branch, the original point for the right branch, and now superimposed in the middle of all of that is a third point, which is full at the moment with a crossing and a switch. But I'm trying to adjust the crossing so that it's the right angle and get it in the right place for
Right.
the third crossing in the 4-foot, and then we'll trim it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's the strategy.
Okay.
I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear to start with.
Oh, it's my fault, I'm sure.
Now, if we look here, we've got something funny going on here because the new point crossing is curved. It's below there, and then it's sort of straightening out. I have a funny feeling that that point has generated a regular crossing, and it wants to be curviform because the rails it's trying to align to are curved. Now we've got that. That is going to give us a better alignment. We can come back and adjust the V crossing angle. Actually slacken it off a little bit. Oops, didn't kill it. Roam it back. Right, and now we want to circulate around this little section a bit. That's going to be not far off, I think. So now we want to roam. So this is trial and error until you get the bit of the crossing nicely superimposed. Nearly there, look, only just that last bit, just to sharpen up the V angle a tad more, and we're there. See what that does. So that's not bad, is it? We've got almost a perfect alignment right the way through there. So we've now got the right V angle on the third point in the right place, and you can see the little white cross which marks the fine point of the turnout we've been manipulating is exactly superimposed over the intersection of the rails. So now we can trim it, and there are two ways of trimming it. You can either use the blanking function and blank up to the crossing and reduce the length back to the crossing, but that would still leave you double tracks, which always looks a bit messy, on the stock rails. Templot does have a function which does that and gets rid of those stock rails for you. It's under Do, which is a sort of a tools menu. Isolate V crossing will remove everything bar the V crossing. What it's left us with is basically the wing rails, the knuckle, and the check rails. So now we want to save that because we don't want to have to do all that again. And now it's a question of whether you want to tidy up that crossing or not, and it's fairly straightforward. The crossing rails actually go straight through the crossing, so it's a bit like the last one. And the technique here is to take, say, the lower point here, make that the control, blank it past the crossing, store it. Copy that, reinstate the blanking, shorten it until it's the other side of the crossing. So that will take the rails away from that, but it leaves you a gap with these rails across. So then you make a third copy of it, reduce both the length and the blanking to fill in the gap and delete the rails you don't want. So it sounds complicated, but I'll just run through that on one side. So I'm going to start by deleting it to the control. I'm going to blank it, mouse action, geometry, blanking, and this will get rid of the rails. Don't be worried that it's all going away. And I want to clear the crossing, and you can see that it wants to join in about there. Save it. Now copy it. Copy to the control. And although that blanking section has gone, Template remembers it. So I can now reinstate that by reversing what we did last time. And if we take it right back to 0. There. But now I want to reduce the length and pull it back this side of the crossing.
I understand now why you get so many bits when you make the complex track formations, because it's basically just doing all this for you, isn't it? And
That's
leaving
right.
you the little bits of the copies of templates that you need to make up whatever it is that you asked it to just go and do, and it went, hey, I've just gone and done it. But
yeah,
in the background, it was beavering away at all of this.
That's right. If you look at the storage box, you will usually see 7 templates comprising a tandem, and they will have the tag of tandem, so you know that they're related to that. And this will leave you 7 templates as well, which I'm pretty chuffed at. But whether it is still the most efficient way of doing it or not, I don't know. So now you can see that we've lost that rail that went in that direction across the crossing, but we've generated 2 gaps. So I want to store it, and then I want to copy it again, and I want to lengthen it so that it covers the gap there, and I want to blank it and just bring it back to the gap. And now we use this wonderful little program again to omit the rails, and we want to omit all the rails we don't need. And the easiest way is just to do each one in turn and see whether it makes any difference. So if we cut out Turnout Road stop rail, right, that's one of the ones we need. Check rail has got at least a duplicate in there. Crossing rail can go. We don't need the V, that's got another copy in there. The main road crossing rail, right, we need that one, but we don't need that check rail. And the main road stop rail had already gone because that was one of the first jobs we did. And now we can save that. And we've left that with timbers in conveniently. So now if you wanted to clean up the last bit of that crossing, you would just repeat that, but with that template. Now, do you want me to do that, or are you happy that that's just a repeat of what we've done?
I'd like to see the finished turnout if that's possible, please.
Okay, so delete this other main template to the control now, and I'll blank that. Blank it past the crossing until it joins up with the V that the third crossing has put there. Store it. Copy it. Reverse the blanking. And reduce the length.
Is your mouse sensitivity still extra fine?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
I just had a ridiculous length of new template to start with, I'm afraid. So I'll bring that up to meet the knuckle, and we'll save that. So if I copy that to the control, I can reduce the blanking to there. Reduce the length to join the gap. Now we can omit the rails. Want that one? Don't want that one. Don't want that one. That's freed up the crossing nose. Want that one? Don't want that one. There we go. And store it. So now we've got nice, clean crossings. They're all the right angles. Switches are nice and neat. Okay, so there's all your running rails. There are 3 jobs to do now. One is to just check for any conflicts. That's probably all right, but it might be nice just to reduce that a little bit. Now, we talked about check rails last time, so I don't know if you want me to rehearse those again, but we can adjust the ends of the wing rails and check rails, and I would just reduce that a tad and maybe machine it so that it just cleared the flangeway a bit more. You could argue whether or not those two check rails would be joined to make a singleton in the prototype. Likewise, that ring rail and that check rail. I think you pays your money and you takes your choice for that. I don't know what the criteria are in the prototype for going one way or the other. The third thing, which I am going to just show you, is you will notice that we have 1, 2, 3 switch marks, which isn't surprising when you think about it, because we have 3 points in here. Although one point is reduced to the rump of a crossing, Templot still thinks it's a point and therefore still thinks it should have a switch mark, which is this one, because in the generator, which determines which bits of the track are generated for each Templot, it tells it to put a switch drive mark in, and we haven't told it to take it out. So what we need to do now, just as a final act, is to make that crossing template the control, and you can see that it's highlighted that unwanted switch mark, and we come into generator settings, switch mark, cancel, gone, save, and then before you forget, you go back into generator to put it back on again for the next template. Otherwise you'll wonder where it's gone. Now it looks as though it's put it back there, but it hasn't on the background template. If you remember, when you store and background, that same template remains the control template until you replace it with another one. So this crossing is still the control template, and because we have restored the switch mark to the generator settings, Templot says, you can have it back again. But we can prove that if we just do shift and join and move it out of the way. There is the background, and there's the switch mark gone. So you've got the wing rails, check rails to play with. You've obviously got timbers to shove as well. But can you see how it's worked out quite well, keeping the timbers just in one of the first 2 main templates and deliberately getting rid of all the others, that we've got timbers pretty well where we want them, in the right orientation, and we've saved ourselves a lot of work. That timber is perfectly placed. The nose of the crossing is fractionally inside the end of the timber. As it happens, that timber is almost right. It wants to go a fraction to the left, so it just slightly overlaps that crossing nose. And the same there. And you might just want to ease the others out by a tad. So there's not much to do on those. These timbers are narrow, plain track timbers because they started out as an approach track, the second point. They need to be beefed up to be 1 foot wide timbers. And then, of course, they all need to be lengthened as far as the timbers going right the way across would be, which I think would be there. And then finally, we need to put timbers on these outlet tracks.
So would you have some of those timbers crossing all 3 exits?
Yes, I would normally, and I would do that probably up to this one. You might just start this rail with ordinary plain sleepers, 2 or 3 sleepers worth before you started this one, because it comes clear of the main line a few sleepers in advance. Yeah, by that distance. And it's a slightly steeper angle as well. This is where I don't know the detailed rules of it, but I think in most you would continue across probably up to about that one. You maybe interlace them from there. But as we mentioned earlier, the easy way to re-timber all of this rather than add timbers individually is to actually make a branch track and save it. And then it's a simple job to roll the timbers so that they interlace with all of those. Can you remember we did that last time?
Yes.
So restore that, and in the same way, delete to the control, split branch. We can timber that. And save that. And again, you could roll the timbers there so they fitted in with the crossing timbers.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a long drawn out process and it seems very pernickety, but once you've got the strategy sorted, there are all sorts of little examples in there that you can apply to any funny geometry of point you're trying to make if Templot won't do it straight up with the tandem function.